Hi, and welcome to another episode of InstaVision. I'm your glamour boy host, Glenn Reynolds. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Virginia Postrel. She's a Bloomberg columnist, a pioneering blogger, and she's the author of The Future and Its Enemies, The Substance of Style, and now The Power of Glamour, something we know all about here at PJTV. Welcome, Virginia. Good to have you here.
Great to be with you.
So, in the old days, glamour was a spell that you'd sort of cast on people to make them see things that weren't there. In its more modern meaning, it's a little different, but maybe not all that different. How do you describe it?
Well, glamour always contains an element of illusion. It's something that's known to be false but felt to be true. So, in some sense, it's like a magic show. We know it's not completely real, but at the same time, we believe it. Glamour is a much broader phenomenon than it's often given credit for. If you think of what is glamorous to you, rather than thinking of the word glamour, it will often give you a better clue. A glamour sort of operates like humor. There's something glamorous out there, and what's glamorous varies with the audience, and then there's an audience, and in the interaction of those two things, a certain emotion arises. In the case of humor, it would be laughter, amusement, etc. In the case of glamour, it's a sense of longing. If only life could be like that. If only I could be with them. If only I had that car, I would be the coolest guy in town. Whatever it might be. And so glamour can be about, fashion and film, the way we tend to think about it. One of the earliest uses of the terms in its modern meaning had to do with military glamour, and there's still a lot of glamour around the military for certain audiences. And it's one of the oldest types of glamour as well, going all the way back to Achilles. So glamour depends on the audience. It always has elements of the promise of escape and transformation, of grace and of mystery.
Yeah, you in fact say that Obama was elected through glamour.
Yeah.
And is that glamour still around?
Well, one of the things about glamour is it's very fragile because it depends on maintaining that certain amount of distance that can allow people to project themselves into whatever it is. So being a glamorous candidate is really valuable in a campaign. I mean, it's a major reason that Obama was the nominee instead of Hillary. People projected onto him what their hopes and dreams for the country were. He was not that well known, so he could encompass many different kinds of hopes and dreams. He had this slightly exotic background, which was also part of his glamour and mystery. But when you actually have to be governing, you have to make decisions, or you're going to alienate some people, and so that glamour is going to dissipate. And the other thing is, a lot of people looked at Obama, and they sort of thought that politics and conflict and political conflict was going to magically disappear. I mean, the illusion in glamour is this illusion of effortlessness and grace, and it was there in the glamour of Obama as well. So for a lot of his supporters, they may still support him, but they're more likely to support him because they don't like the other guys than because he embodies their hopes and dreams the way he did in 2008.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you say, that there is a fragility to glamour. But when I went through your book, actually one of the things that struck me was how many of the old examples you feature, everything from Gibson girls to Charles Lindbergh to astronauts and stuff, still have a resonance today. And for that matter, as you mentioned, the glamour of swords and shields, which are militarily useless but still have a very potent image.
Yeah, well, those things have the things I selected, partly that's why I selected them, because I was looking for things that would still resonate with a modern audience to some extent. But look at Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was incredibly glamorous. I talk about him as sort of the primary exemplar of the glamour of the aviator in the early 20th century. But he also, in his day, lost a lot of his glamour around when he became associated with isolationism in the run-up to World War II. Now, on the one hand, he made that position glamorous for some people who agreed with him and liked that. But on the other hand, people who wanted a more active foreign policy, wanted the U.S. to enter World War II. He lost some of his glamour. Now it was a long time ago, and we tend to remember more of his aviator exploits. So that dissipation of the glamour has gone away. And it is possible for something to be glamorous, then to become unglamorous, then to become glamorous again. I teach a seminar at the School of Visual Arts in a branding program, and I always use the example of Miami in that regard. Miami was glamorous, then it got unglamorous, then it got glamorous again.
That's interesting. That's interesting. From Jackie Gleason to Miami Vice with a space of in between.
Right.
So is glamour, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. I want to say, is glamour a force for good or evil? Or maybe I should ask, should we fortify ourselves to defend against glamour? Or, run with that.
It's a very good question. And what I say in the book is that glamour is neither good nor bad. Glamour is a form of rhetoric, a form of persuasion. It's a way we persuade ourselves of things, and it's a way we persuade other people through. It's a rhetoric that's less about words and more about images. And like any form of rhetoric, it can be used for good or bad purposes, depending on what you're trying to do. So in that regard, it is neutral. Now, the one thing I would say is that glamour it always contains this element of illusion. It always hides details and difficulties. It can be very valuable and very positive in pointing people toward ideals, toward careers they might be interested in is one example that I use throughout the book. Even better social policies. Things can be glamorous, technologies, entrepreneurship, things can be glamorous, and it can point you in a good direction. But it can only be a guide, not a destination. So you have to realize that when you go on vacation to the glamorous resort, you're still going to be you. You might have a little jet lag. The beach is going to be sandy. It might get in your shoes or your shorts. I mean, these little nitty-gritty details they don't tell you in the ads, they're going to be there. It doesn't mean you can't have a good time. It doesn't mean that glamorous resort won't be wonderful. But when you are trying to take glamour and use it as more than just an imaginative moment of escape, as something to actually make decisions with, then you have to think about what is being left out. Is it something that's going to make a difference, or is it something you just have to take as trade-offs and, hey, this glamorous image really did point you in a good direction?
All right, final question. What's the thing that you personally find most glamorous?
What do I find most glamorous? Well, I actually have, I have this intellectual glamour. I mean, I have the idea that it would be, I had it in my youth, and I still have it, that it would be glamorous to be an intellectual, glamorous to sit around and think deep thoughts and write books. And to some degree, I achieved that. But in terms of who I really am, I also have to balance that in my life with a more active role, because I am really not a sit in a quiet study all day and never see anybody kind of person. I need to be around people, and I have an executive temperament as well. So I find this sort of intellectual glamour is very seductive to me, and it really has shaped a lot of my life. But again, editing back in the realities of who I am, I have to consider the ways in which that is deceptive.
That's funny. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up around Harvard with around like Lon Fuller and John Rawls and all these great intellectual types. They seemed not at all glamorous to me as a kid. To me, it was the astronauts,
Right.
that seemed
Well,
glamorous,
astronauts
who
are
were off
glamorous.
somewhere else doing something different. And so you watch the right stuff and you get the kind of imagery that I was looking at then. But no one's a hero to their valet or to the child of a grad student.
Well, I have to say my first experience of glamour, thinking back of it, when I was a child, my favorite book in kindergarten was this book, You Will Go to the Moon. So that was probably my first, that was my first glamorous experience. And if you actually, I thought about including the cover of that book among the images in my book. I didn't do that because it was complicated, but I do have a picture of a little boy looking, longingly at a little model of a rocket, which captures that same idea that those of us of a certain age, many of us grew up with that glamour of space travel.
Well, and sort of going to your point, actually, all these billionaires now who are building rockets and planning to go to the moon or to space are doing it because of probably of the glamour of space travel they were exposed to in their childhood.
Yeah, I think that's exactly a perfect example. I mean, these are guys who are very successful in business. They may or may not have had some glamorous idea of entrepreneurship, who knows, but unquestionably, they, like us, the two of us, were enamored of this glamour of space travel, and now they're in a position where they can, take that glamorous ideal and try to turn it into something real, which means getting into all the nitty-gritty details about how you do that. But I think that's a great example. There's a lot, and I talk about this some. I also talk about the jet age, so it's more jet travel. But there was a lot of that glamour around aerospace in the mid 20th century, 50s, 60s period.
And maybe now it's coming back. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us here.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's Virginia Postrel. The book is The Power of Glamour, Longing and the Art of Visual Persuasion. And her website is deepglamour.net. And she's also at vpostrel.com. Thanks to all of you glamorous viewers for joining us here. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.